Good morning. My name is Keats Meyer, and I'm the Executive Director of the Madison Square Park Conservancy. And it is my great pleasure to welcome you all here this morning for a conversation with artist Abigail DeVille and Gonzalo Casals, Commissioner of the New York City Department of Cultural Affairs. Madison Square Park has remained open throughout the pandemic. We are very proud to be able to provide an outdoor oasis for respite and reflection for those who have been isolating indoors all this long time. We've seen extensive use of the park by our neighbors, friends, and it has become a place for protesters to gather. We're proud of our role to be able to serve the community in this way. Before we begin, there are a few housekeeping items. If you have questions at any time during the presentation, please type them into the chat function. There will be time for question and answers later in the program, and we'll address them then. And now it is my great pleasure to introduce Brooke Kamen-Rappaport, Deputy Director of the Conservancy and the Martin Friedman Chief Curator.
Hi, good morning, everyone. Thank you so much, Keats. I am thrilled that you've all joined Madison Square Park Conservancy's program today. I should mention that a video of this program and a written transcript will be available following on the Conservancy's website. I'm honored to welcome our speakers, Abigail DeVille and Commissioner Gonzalo Casals. Before I introduce them, I'd like to acknowledge and thank my colleagues Dana Klein and Hannah Sturz for their wonderful efforts on our Zoom programs. As well, I should recognize Kendall Henry, who sits on the Conservancy's Art Committee and who works with Commissioner Casals. I'd like to share this slide and thank those who supported Abigail's Light of Freedom and those who are ongoing patrons of the Conservancy's art program. It has been so gratifying to work together with these supporters to bring Abigail's sculpture and the program's ongoing inspiring public artworks out into civic space. Last June, just a few months ago, the Conservancy approached Abigail DeVille about making a piece that could address the civil crisis due to the pandemic, election, and protests across the country. How could public art right now impact people and communities and respond through an artist's vision? Abigail's response began with this drawing for Light of Freedom. She then realized a computer rendering towards production of the sculpture. Light of Freedom was fabricated in the summer and fall and installed and opened 2 weeks ago in Madison Square Park. It is a pleasure to bring her work to the park for park goers to be moved and challenged. Abigail DeVille was born in 1981 and maintains a studio in the Bronx. She received a BFA from Fashion Institute of Technology, attended Skowhegan School of Painting and Sculpture, and received an MFA from Yale. She has participated in residencies at the International Studio and Curatorial Program in Brooklyn, the Studio Museum in Harlem, the Radcliffe Institute for Advanced Study Fellowship, Rauschenberg Foundation in Captiva, and the American Academy in Rome, Rome Prize. Abigail is on faculty at Maryland Institute College of Art in Baltimore, and she will be teaching at Yale School of Art this spring. She participated in Madison Square Park Conservancy Symposium in 2019 and has exhibited her work at the Contemporary Art Museum in St. Louis, the Institute of Contemporary Art in LA, the Stedelijk in Amsterdam, and the New Museum here in New York. Light of Freedom carries cogent symbols, and I'll let Abigail describe those to you, but I think of Abigail as an artist who is also a citizen archaeologist. She excavates the strata of civilization to unearth histories and artifacts and culture, and she brings those into her work. Light of Freedom is a reference to the Statue of Liberty's torch and flame that were displayed in Madison Square Park between 1876 and 1882. She also considered the history of enslaved Africans who first came to New Amsterdam in 1626 and today's Black Lives Matter movement. Gonzalo Casals is the Commissioner of New York City Department of Cultural Affairs, a position he began in March 2020. He directs cultural policy for the city and oversees hundreds of millions of dollars in funding for over 1,000 nonprofit arts and cultural organizations. Gonzalo was previously director of the Leslie Lohman Museum of Art in New York. He was vice president of programs and community engagement at Friends of the High Line and led the team in a transformative process that shifted the focus of the organization to equitable cultural practice for the surrounding neighborhoods. He was also the director of education and public programs at El Museo del Barrio. Gonzalo was part of the consultant team that led public engagement for Create NYC, the city's first comprehensive cultural plan, and he was a member of the Mayoral Advisory Commission on Art, Monuments, and Markers. Gonzalo participated in Madison Square Park Conservancy's 2018 symposium called Removing Public Art, which considered historic monuments and contemporary solutions. He teaches at CUNY, NYU, and Yale, and is an active participant in Jackson Heights, Queens civic life, where he has lived since 2002. Welcome, Abigail, and welcome, Gonzalo, and thank you both so very much for doing this today.
Thank you, Brooke, and thanks for having me, and thanks everybody at Madison Square Park Conservancy for inviting me and inviting Abigail, but also for yet another amazing commission. I've been following the work you guys have been doing for so long. Always inspired by the work that you present. And Abigail, it's an honor for me to be in conversation with you. It's amazing how your work confront us with aspects of the history that, for some reason, have been conveniently forgotten in order to support a national narrative that leaves out marginal and minority groups. And today, I wanted to have a conversation with you around three larger ideas around history, labor, and freedom, which they all somehow come together in Light of Freedom, the piece that's installed at Madison Square Park. And I wanted to start with history, which is sort of probably the lowest hanging fruit once we start looking and dissecting your work. And in a conversation that we had earlier, you talk about how we are just moving in cycles in history. And I want to hear a little bit more about that and how your work sort of try to break those cycles.
Well, actually, in thinking about our conversation today, I just stumbled on this article that was in the Atlantic. I think it was published in 2018 by Walt Hunter, and it was thinking through the kind of misinterpretation of the Emma Lazarus poem that was written in the way that it was politicized and used a lot in 2017 by the Trump administration and Nancy Pelosi, and the argument about refugees, or what the kind of meaning of this, more about the words of her poem than perhaps than the actual sculpture represents, and kind of missing the point. And one of the things that I thought was really interesting that he brings up in the article is when he talks about that the year before Emma Lazarus wrote her poem was publicly debuted, the Chinese Exclusion Act happened in 1883, right? And then the year after that, European nations met in Berlin to divide up the African continent into colonies. So, like, thinking about that, there has always been this place that I guess maybe artists can enter into, and being in the center of things where it's more of a kind of idealized or ideological space versus what is being practiced in contemporary, in the contemporary moment. So thinking about how her actual, the parts of her poem, the 14-line poem that are not talked about is a critique, the first half of it. And then the second half is the Lady Liberty speaking through the form as if, she's speaking silently. And so I thought that was really interesting that both the Bartoli, the sculptor, the inventor of the Statue of Liberty, and his 21-year quest to have it produced and made and put in New York Harbor, was thinking about the liberties that actually France did not have, right? Like putting it out there as a kind of good hope wish for something that he wished actually that France would have more of. And so then, yes, it was created partially for the 100th anniversary of the United States being able to still exist after 100 years, but also really as kinds of critiques and wishes of people's own governmental systems within their time. So I think it's funny, the way that that we're all moving in similar kinds of circles constantly.
And it is your hope that, with your work, which is sort of break those cycles and sort of bring to light, no pun intended in relation to the work, but bring to light some of the again, these stories that had been forgotten or that had been put aside. I always think that, we look at the past to act in the present so we can inform the future, right? How do you think your work, in addition to sort of, as Brooke said, being an archaeologist that finds that those stories, how do you think they inform our present, and what's your hope, what they would do in the future?
I mean, I think, it's such a large question to think about. Can we escape our past? Can we do a little bit better than last year, 200 years ago, 400 years ago, right? Like if maybe, like in what's in the heart of human beings, and struggle for power and, desire to oppress people, is always there, is something that always has to be fought against. I think the examining maybe is also like, crib notes, right? Like a cliff notes, right? As to, okay, yeah, that happened before. So how did they deal with this in this particular way? Sort of similarly the way that people were starting to, reference and look at the pandemic from 1918 at the beginning of quarantine, right? And thinking about, well, what was life like in that particular moment, or what kinds of things were people making in response to that pandemic, and then seeing that there was very little visual art or representation that came out of that particular moment that responded to it. And so then I think I guess I don't have a good answer or a clear answer as to, can we actually, as human beings, learn from our past? I don't know. I think there are ways that we can continue to strive to be better and not be overburdened and try to get past, the dirt of our forefathers. But I think there is it feels like a very long race, and the baton is constantly being passed. And so hopefully we can learn from what happened just previously and how that affects the contemporary. And then maybe we can set up something a little bit better for the people, the people that are forthcoming.
And Abigail, in looking at your own history, how does your relationship with history start as an artist? Is this something that you're always drawn into? Or?
Yeah, I mean, I like, as a kid, it was art and American history were my favorite subjects. Like that's pretty much what I was invested in. Like very early on, I remember getting impassioned in elementary school and being pissed off about Native Americans and slavery and everything else in the way that it was being taught to me. So I think there are probably ways in thinking through material and thinking about history as an actual raw material, and in which there are new vantage points to be discovered from, these dusty facts that we have, or a story that has been highly, compressed, that we that we can glean more information from it. So I think, I think of history as the basic raw material for everything.
And we're going to talk about materials in a minute when we start talking about labor. But another aspect of history, and this is something I experienced myself working into cultural specific museums that represents the work of, marginal groups and Latinx and then queer community, is how important to see yourself reflected in society, right? Like if you don't see yourself reflected in society, you think you're alone and you start feeling alienated.
Mm-hmm.
How do you think people react when they look at your work and the representation of their story in society? How much does it matter?
I mean, I hope that it matters, but I think outside of myself, I think it's incredibly important that people and for everyone, right? Like, so people don't these narratives don't exist within a vacuum, so that we're actually told the truth about ourselves and who has contributed and in every aspect of society and the ways that we come together and how we understand whatever American culture is, right? That it's a conglomeration of all of these different forces that commingle together in this one place and time. So then it's really beginning to understand why certain things are the way that they are. And I think and initially, when I started doing installations within institutional spaces or in white walled museum spaces, it was thinking about the narratives that aren't necessarily ever really seen within particular museums or institutions, maybe in New York or in other places, but that have to deal with the communities right outside their doors, and thinking about how can you usher the material waste of that particular life experience within those like hollowed halls, and not only elevating their narratives and stories that are being told through the materials, but also actually opening conversations for other viewers that enter into those spaces as well.
And let's talk a little bit about, in particular, about Light of Freedom. The commission came to you in a very interesting time for all of us. And how was the process? How was it formed? What were the decisions that led to this amazing work of art?
Well, I think I was honored first, and then second, kind of relieved that I had something to put energy towards, that I could potentially make something that could talk about all of the things that were happening in 2012, and it's not even over yet, y'all. Buckle your seatbelts. We still got a few more weeks before we get out of here. Like every month there's been another thing. But so, it was just like, okay, great, amazing, wonderful. I have something to try to think about, to put energy towards, and to also think about, the kind of wave of grief, gloom, doom, and death that has it's been like a tidal wave that has like washed over everything. And then thinking about, who can I honor within that space, like, and thinking through grief or thinking through mourning, and then having a public space to do that. And then then going through the history of Madison Square Park, and then seeing the torch just sitting there, I was just like, get out of here, perfect, done, it's a wrap, right? And then I was like, okay, history already made it for me. I just I have to think through the material, as you mentioned briefly, and what it means for us to isolate this one particular move or moment in the park's history right now.
I'm talking to you from Jackson Heights. I'm assuming you're in the South Bronx in your studio. These were the two hardest hit areas, with COVID at the peak of the pandemic. And of course, areas in which Black and brown folks live and suffer the pandemic. How does that affected, the narratives that you're including in this work?
I think there's So I just had three thoughts, but I was thinking about and the ways in which these communities were hit was because they were deemed essential workers, right? Like that was like the bulk of it, right? That there was no momentary pause for any of these communities and how, vital their labor is, one, and but then two, there's just no break, like there's just no break for Black and brown communities in terms of access to proper health care, and also, having a moment to be able to take a day off, but then needing to pay your rent, right? Or needing to care for your elderly family members, or like a sick loved one or young children or whatever. Like it's an unending thing that at the end of the day, the thing in which the society you live in values at the end of everything is your labor. And so if it's not your life, it's your labor, right? If there's not a space for you at the table, they still require your labor. And so, I think that's the thing that I also wanted to talk or think through within the structure of the scaffolding that is a kind of, encasing the torch, because then we think about the torch as this baton or this democratic fire that burns, that only burns because people will it to continue from generation to generation. But then thinking about the ways in which labor is fetishized and valorized, and thinking that that is the only real kind of worth or value that an immigrant brings to this country is their work, right? Like their labor. I actually need you to come deliver me some food, so that this is why today your life matters, but in a few weeks, or, when this is all over, I'm going to go back to, not really caring about your existence. And so I'm hoping that, maybe that there will be more long-term systematic changes after, we see it in the ways in which, their labor was was debased and devalued, and as well as their lives.
Alex Rivera says that, his work around immigrants says, America wants the labor, but not the immigrants, right? Mm-hmm. We want to get the production, but we don't want to have to deal with the bodies, right? And it made me think a little bit about the limbs in your, on the torch, and, how they're also, that torch is represented by the work of, society. And what was, I know that you have a process of like going around with a cart, finding materials that is going to help you inform your work. Talk to me about the limbs, talk to me about the color, talk to me about how they fit in these ideas of labor and history.
Well, I had heard a country song maybe sometime this summer about laborers being the physical tools of the rich, like the actual tools of the rich. But then thinking about that your arm or your hand is a tool, and in which all of like the drama of your life is enacted with, right? And but then also thinking about all of the people that have gone, kind of unsung within New York history, or thinking about New York history and specific kinds of labor. So what you just said about, and in agreement with what Alex said, but in thinking about in the ways that immigrants are treated, are direct parallels into the way that, African Americans were brought here, right? And how their bodies have never been valued, and constantly devalued and kept in a very specific place over the last 4 centuries, when they were just brought here to work. Like nobody asked to come here, But so then thinking that, and then also through Faith Ringel has this incredible painting of the Statue of Liberty, where there are Black people that are drowning in the water behind her. But like thinking about all of the bodies that came, waterborne, over wherever they came from, right, willingly or not, and how most of that was, seafaring passengers. So that's why I was thinking about the blue, and then thinking about blue also as the hottest form of fire, but then thinking about that's actually, fire is a purifying force, and that the thing that purifies or is this kind of constant renewal for the ideals of America or the promise of America is birth within from generation to generation. So thinking about how that has been, birthed or in new form in the ways that people have been radical and in the streets protesting, for the lives of Breonna Taylor and George Floyd, over the course of events that unfolded over the summer. But then thinking about the Black women that started Black Lives Matter in 2013, and how all of these things it's like a fireball, like that's, to me, is the thing that illuminates the torch. And then the limbs, some of those got recycled from previous projects. And it was actually kind of hard to look for mannequin arms specifically right now. Isolating a body part, people want you to take the whole mannequin. They don't sell, loose limbs, are not hanging around all over the place. But Material for the Arts has been very generous. And I have hit them up many times over the years for their, various mannequin, inventory, but yeah.
And thank you for the shout out to Materials for the Arts. I don't know if you know, it's part of my agency, so I'm glad that we're being helpful. Just talk to me about your own labor. You have a very specific way of practicing, like we've seen you in videos pushing carts, collecting stuff, around the areas in which you're going to install your work. Talk to me about that.
I guess I'm a little bit of a, I don't want to say trash collector. I'm definitely an information collector, whether it's like forgotten facts or, yesterday's lunch, you know what I mean? Like I'm always digging around and looking for something that is being overlooked, but could be a catalyst to deeper understanding of, the spaces that we occupy. So it is a lot of moving around, tons of junk. And, it's a lot of moving trucks and material around. I mean, it's almost / as much moving as it is, making. There's a lot of, yeah.
So you have these ideas in mind that you want to sort of represent, and then you just go around looking for things that might help you convey those ideas, or you have a sort of a archive of elements that got your attention, and then as you're working in different things, they become,
I think
symbols.
Yeah, I think recently I've realized that the connection is language or their words, and thinking about the materials as actual words. So there's a lot of time that I get inspiration from something that I read, a poem, a quote, something that is textual, and then it is birthed from that. So yeah.
Poems keep coming. You mentioned the poem, at the end, Statue of Liberty, and is poetry something that also you read a lot and you nurture your work from?
I think maybe in a way that I don't realize, but yeah, yeah. I think that there's been multiple works that I have been inspired by different poems. So I think that there is something, definitely there that I don't think I've fully thought through yet. But yes, I would agree with that.
So Abigail, the other aspect I wanted to talk about is freedom, and because I find that interesting, in the same way that you look back at history and rewrite it, or just problematize it. There are these concepts that also you're bringing up to light, and forcing us to look them in a different way. Mm-hmm. And freedom has been so bastardized and manipulated in our country for so many years, and more recently now, as the response to the pandemic got politicized. I just wanted to hear a little bit from you, so you did research about the park, you found that amazing photograph mm-hmm. about, the arm and the torch of the Statue of Liberty in the park, for people to donate money, and how, what was the first things that came to mind in terms of freedom in the context in which we're living?
Well, I think it's interesting in the way that the torch, so the torch, the flame was based on the original flame that was installed at the Statue of Liberty that was replaced, I think, around 1985 or 1986. So the one that's there currently is more in speaking with the vision of the artist. But the first one was glass panes, and it had a light actually in it. It was an actual lighthouse. And then the way that it functions like a cage, right? And I think, you know what, and not to bring up poetry again, but Emma
Good.
Lazarus, Emma Lazarus has a line in the poem where she talked specifically about imprisoned lightning, I think was the term which she used for the description of the torch. And so then, so not to say that we're all imprisoned, but the ways in which specific segments of the population have been imprisoned, the ways in which people have been consistently denied access to ideas, or what these ideas of liberty are the very people who are the ones who are the proponents of it, that push actually liberty potentially to be in existence. And I think liberty, the Statue of Liberty is Libertas, the Roman goddess. I think is what the idea is based on. But yeah, she. I'm just sorry, I just got caught up in my notes. But so I defined liberty as, and the dictionary says that it's the state of being free within society from oppressive restrictions imposed by authority on one's way of life, behavior, or political views. And then the other definition of it secondary is the power to act. But you know, you know what I'm saying? Like, we already know, right? Like, all of the kind of, besides the embedded, like the hypocrisy there, the also the hope, the great hope that is also like lying and living within that, and the hope that is continues to, you know, burn.
And I find it interesting that you chose to replicate, you know, the torch and the fire, but just connected to the first enslaved residents of in the city of the Isle of Manhattan, and this idea that, you know, some folks usually use freedom as a way, as an excuse to oppress others, right? And how your piece is sort of like putting that tension, right? You know, like, yes, we're in a country that we say that we value freedom, but sometimes we don't understand the responsibilities that come with that, right? And how when you're in society, is the well-being of the whole society comes before your individual freedom.
Mm-hmm.
Go ahead.
No, I was just thinking, like, the Libertas sculpture was usually portrayed as a matron with a laurel wreath and a conical felt cap that had been given to freed slaves. So I think that there's already a slavery connection within the choosing of that particular form, and the ways in which, like, the crown on her head is something that was given to a freed slave in Roman society. And thinking about, well, maybe those are actually really probably potentially the only people that could show the way or lead the way as guides to potentially what a path to freedom could look like. And, you know, people who have lost the most, or have been unfairly treated or oppressed, actually have the greatest hope and value within a system that purports to believe in freedom. And so they, to me, could only be the bearers of it, right? So, and thinking about, oh, how can we also talk about, you know, like the original sins of America embedded within the form? It's kind of already there, you know, like the sculptor built it in there, and then Emma Lazarus, you know, poem kind of drives it home. But in thinking about, yeah, right, like these people, these have always been the people who could only be the ones who could talk about freedom, right? Or what freedom means, or potentially how we could actually get there, or what does that actually even look like? I mean, nobody's listening to the oppressor about what freedom looks like, you know?
So Abigail, as you talk, I can help think myself, how ingrained, ideas of colonialism, white supremacy, exist. It's not only about the history we tell, but, it's the elements that, result from that history. Monuments have been, and public art had been, at the center of these ideas, right? How we need to do away from those elements. And it's interesting because in your work, you use the very same elements, but you try to maybe reclaim them or resignify what they mean. What's your hope, as your work continues to, this piece in particular is going to be traveling around the country. What's your hope in which, different contexts is going to bring to this work and the understanding of what you're trying to say?
I think the torch as it exists and the Statue of Liberty as she's been standing there for almost 140 years is, a symbol that Americans or people who are living in this country understand it as a light or a bearer of, potentially maybe enlightenment and maybe like a promise of freedom. But then there's always struggles of story, no matter where you land in this country, there is stories there that have the original ingredients, and they have, different textures and maybe different kinds of flavors, but like there's stories that all have to do with the kinds of persistent struggles for freedom that different groups of people that have found themselves here have continued to push for. I remember initially in the early days of researching for this project, I found a story, I can't remember now where it was, but perhaps in Georgia, which happened in the 1500s, like the first kind of rebellion or, like freedom fight that happened in the 1500s was in Georgia. Somebody came on a ship from Spain, had slaves with them. Within 6 months of this little colony being founded, the native populations and the Africans that were brought banded together and burned the whole colony down, and they hightailed it back to Spain. But like thinking about the ways that these groups have had coalitions with each other from the very beginning, and then thinking about them as being like the true kind of freedom fighters, or, the real heroes of American history is the people who were constantly fighting off the yoke of their oppressors who profess to be, these liberators, right? That was really just for them and people who look like them.
I cannot help myself to think about the recent elections and how, once again, Black and brown people were the ones that really did the work to flip, the state of the country. I'm going to leave it at that. There's a, I don't want to get in trouble. There's one of my favorite parts of your work, of the Light of Freedom, is the bell. Right? Can you talk about, specifically, I don't want to give it away, I want you to give it away. What's the bell? What is it all about? And, what the meaning that you're giving to it?
I was going to say, ring the alarm. No, but, thinking about that call for freedom, or that constant ringing of the gong when something's about to pop off, like when something is about to happen, there's an alert that happens for the whole of the community, right? And I think that goes back into European traditions, but the Liberty Bell that's in Philadelphia, or thinking about the way that potentially freedom rings, right? Or it's a kind of wake-up call, but the people that keep banging that Liberty Bell, right, have been banging it for a very long time. So I think thinking about the call to action, that freedom is an act, right, is encapsulated within that form, and then that becomes the center, that is the voice of the torch that's being passed.
And the bell is originally a school bell, is that right?
Mm-hmm. Mm-hmm.
Which to me has a lot of meaning, right?
Yeah. Mm-hmm. Open up books.
But also the next generation, like really understanding history in a different way that you and I probably understood when we were growing up. And, I don't know, I found it inspiring, right? There was the school bell at the center of this piece.
Yeah.
I think it's time for Q&A, Brooke. Is that right?
Wow, that was an incredibly dynamic dialogue. Thank you, Abigail and Gonzalo. We're going to let me go into the chat, and there are many questions here, so let's try to get through a few of them. Christopher de la Roa has asked, Lady Liberty has meant so much to immigrants and upheld the ongoing narrative of freedom, but has it ever meant that for the African Americans who were never truly afforded those same liberties? Is she antiquated? Do we need a new, true symbol of freedom for all of the new generations?
No, that's a good question, Christopher. I don't know. I don't know the answer to that. But I think I don't want to say that potentially activism is a symbol, right? That is an enduring symbol, that is a real, maybe it doesn't have a physical form, and it's something that is fluid and moves from group to group. But I think that that's probably more of a tenet for freedom, or thinking about symbols that could hold what freedom means. I think is kind of, it's kind of, it's almost too large to really understand, I think. But I don't know if that we should throw everything away. There's a documentary that Ken Burns made in 1985 about the Statue of Liberty, and in it they ask, James Baldwin what he thinks freedom means, and at the end of it, he says that for Black people in this nation, that the Statue of Liberty is a bitter joke. And so, I think that's true, but I'm not gonna leave it there. I don't think that white supremacy can have everything, that we've been a part of everything, and so then we can take our stake and our claim and some of these symbols too.
And I think it's important to, they're not mutually exclusive. I think symbols are important, and we see symbols either coming down or being created. We've seen it this summer with Black Lives Matter. But there's also the action, right? And some people say, well, those are symbols, we need real action. And some people said, well, we need the symbols. I think both of them go in parallel. Symbols inspire us, hold us accountable, make us think very differently, very much like the light of freedom. But then we need to make sure that there's action behind that, right?
Our next question comes from Sarah Stein-Sapir, who asks, given how the political climate has started to shift since the work was created, has its significance changed or evolved for you?
I think it's too early to tell for me to understand what, or for any of us to understand what's actually even really happening right now. So I can't say, but I'm optimistic. I'm optimistic.
I just want to say that the problems that we've been facing the last 4 years are not new. We've been facing them for 400 years. And it's going to take more than an election to solve those problems. Yes, hopefully we're in the right direction, but we're not going to solve them by showing up every 4 years. waiting in line for 3 hours to vote and feel good about ourselves, right? The work just start now. And, we should commit to at least a decade of, daily work towards, a much more progressive, equitable society. Abigail is smirking.
I agree.
Abigail, Lori Shepard asks, at this point in time, how do you feel about creating permanent monuments as opposed to temporary ones?
I think I would be interested potentially in a permanent monument if it has to do with, the things that I'm concerned with. If it's the valorization of a unknown group of people, or somebody who contributed something that people don't know about, or, a space that is very well known, but reimagined in a way where people can have a different kind of experience with it. But yeah, but you know what happens when people get used to things, right? They don't see it anymore, right? It becomes, it becomes another tree, another bush, it's not.
I mean, then Jason Rosenfeld is asking, is any monument ever truly permanent? Certainly, this is the question that's in the air at this moment. Is permanence even the goal?
I think conversation is the goal, and education, or, different ways of thinking and seeing is the goal. Maybe not necessarily, like monuments of power, like monuments maybe for people and for, monuments for people versus monuments for power. And I think, within a generation or two, nobody even knows who these people were anyway, like these bronze statues are of, maybe with the exception of like founding fathers and the Confederate monuments, but, like people don't really know who these people are to begin with, but yeah.
Brooke, if you will, Abigail was mentioning, like the work is going to travel to different parts in the country, and while it's still going to remain the same, you were looking into doing research, as a site-specific approach. You want to talk a little bit about that?
Sure. There's ongoing research for the park as it exists here in Madison, for the sculpture as it exists here in Madison Square Park, and digging up other lesser known stories about people who contributed to the city of New York and its history. But then thinking about this sculpture as it travels to different places like Arkansas or wherever, it ends up, that there are similar stories in everywhere in this nation. And so then finding those and having, local communities to be able to engage with those lesser known stories is also potentially, light being brought into a conversation, into existing conversation.
So that the sculpture will remain the same, Abigail. The next venue, the project closes at the end of January in Madison Square Park, and then it will travel to the Momentary at Crystal Bridges in Bentonville, Arkansas. The actual physical work will remain the same, but conceptually you'll bring new research and new strata and new excavation to the surround of the piece.
Yeah, and like the original or the real title of the Statue of Liberty is Liberty Enlightening the World, and so then thinking there have already been people that have enlightened their communities, and so then I'm thinking about how can then we reshift or refocus and recalibrate that light for the communities who aren't going to engage with it.
Okay,
Brooke, while you read the questions, I need to
yes.
set up. I see that
Please.
Chitra Ganesh who's an amazing artist, is here, and she did an amazing piece in very similar light to Abigail, and it's on view on the facade of the Les Lomas Museum, and I invite everybody to see it.
Thank you, Gonzalo. Thank you for joining Chitra today. Abigail, Austin Thomas asks, if you have a fantasy exhibition, if money were no object, where would it be? And could it be anywhere or everywhere?
I have no idea, but you know, I really want to go into outer space, so that has nothing to do with anything. Yeah. I want a rocket ride to the moon or something. Somebody make that happen. But yeah,
that sounds good. Okay. Many children are seeing your work in the park, asks Susan Herman. How would you like parents to interpret the work to their children, especially in terms of freedom, lack of during the COVID pandemic?
Well, I think that's what the signage is, you know, because I think kids instantly know what it is. They instantly know it's like the Statue of Liberty's torch, and they're engaged and they want to know why the scaffolding is around it, and they have lots of questions. But I think the signage is providing clues for other entry points into the conversation. So it's not just about, you know, the history of the Statue of Liberty being in the park, or what the Statue of Liberty has meant for people in this nation for 150 years, but actually, you know, what I'm the things that I'm interested in talking about, and potentially, you know, that Frederick Douglass quote that is there could allude to and talk to the protests that happened this summer, and hopefully, you know, parents are having those conversations with their children.
Last question, I think, before we wrap up. Penny Peace is asking about your question, Abigail. Can we escape our past? And the phrase, the dirt of our forefathers, reflect my musings on what to do with questionable public monuments, such as the Sims Monument, which has been removed and replaced. I wholeheartedly agree with its removal. I'm concerned with the erasure of our history. What is your opinion?
Oh, I've been having fantasy conversations with a friend of mine and thinking about like a bad monuments museum, not in the way that Hitler had that, you know, derelict artist or whatever, you know, exhibition, but thinking about there needs to be a place where all of these, you know, these monuments that are being torn down, that there's a real place to reflect and to, you know, not like the Bad Boys Museum or something, but like, you know, and thinking through why these things were erected, when they were erected, who commissioned them, who made them, why were they in the particular locations that they were in, to think through history and in the ways that, you know, people want to hold on to a kind of mythology about us, about who we are. And so I think that will only aid in our understanding of ourselves and our understanding and our relationship to history.
There are some cases, there's a park in India in which most of the monuments from the colonial times, you know, are just all there. And there's some cases now in Eastern Europe about monuments to, you know, the Soviet era, that they're all like pulled together as a way to remember this is a moment in our history that we're not proud of, but we don't want to forget.
Absolutely.
Gonzalo, Abigail, thank you so much for your reflections and your insights today on art and liberty and freedom. I think we have all learned so much from this conversation. This is a time when Abigail has brought her light through her work to communities and to histories. And so we're grateful, Abigail, to you for that. And Gonzalo, New York City's cultural institutions are in your good hands now and through very challenging times. And all of us wish you only great strength and continued abiding passion in your work and the work that you do. We are so grateful to you both for participating today. Thank you.
Thank you.
Thank you, Brooke. And thank you, Abigail. It was amazing talking to you.
Thank you so much.
Stay well, everyone. Bye-bye. Bye.